Greetings, PlayStation Universe, and welcome to episode 36 of PlayStation Fix. Will Robinson isn't here today. You might have been able to tell. This is Kyle Prawl, one of the senior editors at PlayStation Universe, and I'm joined by, well, I was about to call you a special guest, Tim, but to be honest, this is appearance number 3 for you, and it's starting to, it's just become routine at this point.
Yes, it has.
How does it feel to have joined the circle of trust, as it were?
It's like just an overall acceptance that just makes me feel. I don't know. I can't think of anything right now. It's pretty good though.
Validating, yes.
That's
Good.
a word. Yeah.
Good. Say validating, because that's actually a compliment to us and the show that we're running. Well, thanks for tuning in, guys. Thanks for listening. We're here to sort of follow up on our conversation in the last episode. In episode 35, we debated the merits of PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 3, the most important console war, and talked about, given where they're at, or where PS4 is at in its life cycle currently, how does it stack up to the ground that PS3 was able to gain in the same amount of time, mid-2009 versus mid-2016 today. And when all was said and done, I feel like the three of us sort of fell on the same side of the fence, just in varying degrees of disarray after the fall. I mean, you guys leaped into PS3 territory, and I was kind of like, I don't know, and then I slipped and fell in with you guys. That's a pretty accurate statement, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, that's one for one, I think. Yeah.
Nice. All right, we'll see if I can keep up that streak throughout the episode. But we had so much fun. I mean, I think I speak for all three of us when I say that it was really not rewarding in like an achievement sense, but kind of rewarding in a nostalgic sense to look back at the games we played in the PS3's early years, because it has, at least for me, it had been long enough that I had forgotten so many of them. So in the process of doing the research for that podcast, I looked back and thought, oh my god, like Grand Theft Auto 4, that was such a defining moment in my life. MGS4, how can I let the luster of that game fade over time? I don't know, how'd that feel to you?
Oh, the whole process was just fun. I going into it, I went, well, this is probably just going to be a wash. You know where this is going.
Mm-hmm.
Especially considering we're living in this medium as we. I remember you saying it that way, living in this ecosystem.
Yes.
And that's so potent being in it now, but it was kind of refreshing being able to validate the fact that essentially our origins are what are not most important to us, but so important that we can't let it go.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of the ecosystem too, I mean, even thinking about the PlayStation blog, the PlayStation publish schedule, the PlayStation catalog of games looks and feels so different today than it did in 2007 and 2008. I think it's easy. I mean, it's easy for us to forget, and it's certainly easy for new-ish PlayStation gamers who weren't there to understand that, like, it was kind of a barren wasteland of games in 07 and 08. At least it kind of felt like that. I think what we learned in the process of looking back is that you had these incredible highlights that were paradigm shifts in and of their own right, that changed genres like Grand Theft Auto and MGS4. But today, you've got PlayStation Plus kicking out 6 free games every month. You've got games in genres that didn't exist back then, like No Man's Sky, and it just seems like we're beset from all angles by new game titles and new things coming out. Is all of it worth playing? I mean, definitely not. Like, that's ultimately PS3 did win, right? But it's really it's rich to be in this ecosystem today. But those games of the past did change us and changed how we play, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I wouldn't say that we'd have that same kind of mentality now. And I was just kind of like, well, I'm feeling something, but it's kind of.
But what am I feeling? I don't know.
Yeah.
That says
it just
a lot.
Kind of feels like it's like putting a little bit on top of like you've already made the cake and you're just kind of putting the icing on it now.
Yeah, the cake is grander and more delicious than it's ever been. But sometimes you just want to dig to the bottom and play Trails of Cold Steel. Speaking of Trails of Cold Steel, so following up on last week's conversation, in which we had so much fun and we went on for 2 hours and we just had a blast talking about these old games, we thought, why not keep it going? It's a weak news week as far as the summer games drought is going right now. I think the most notable thing that's been going on this week has been the No Man's Sky leaks, which we don't have the game yet. We can't talk about it even if we wanted to, so there's not much to say there. Instead, I wanted to talk about PS3, since I can't let it go, and it's actually really pertinent to my gaming life right now because I'm going back and trying to fill the backlog. But since we decided that PS3 in its early years was such a champion and ultimately produced so many great games, I mean, let's get down to brass tacks and sort of close the book on PS3 conversation and talk about what our favorite games of that generation were. Like, what are our 10 favorite PS3 games? Before we dive into that, though, why don't we just give the nods to the runners-up now, right? Let's head that off. We can throw out the games that we wanted to include in our personal best 10 lists, and sort of head off any accusations of how could you forget this, how could you forget that. There's plenty I forgot, I'm sure of that, but there are several that I remembered but also didn't include. We actually talked about this before the show. Mass Effect 2 is one of those for both of us. We didn't put that in our top 10s, but it definitely carries an honorable mention, or is worthy of honorable mention.
Oh yeah, it's definitely the most honorable of mentions up there too, because like that, it being a brand new face to PlayStation, it once before being an Xbox face.
Mm-hmm.
That's a weird way to say it, but the face of Xbox, kind of, not right next to Master Chief, it becoming then a PlayStation representative was so big, and the fact that it was also like it was fine-tuned for the PlayStation 3, and that was kind of a special feeling because they gave it that new engine that they were working on just to show us what it could do. And it was kind of like, well, you finally got it, yeah, but we want to make sure that you really get into it. Like, we want to give you something apart from the game that validates the fact that you've had to wait. And that was a great way to do it. So Mass Effect was huge for us.
It really did feel like the definitive edition too, with just being having all the DLC packaged in to the PS3 edition. I think it says a lot about me being just totally bought into this PlayStation world and being a complete loyalist, because my Mass Effect experience is going out and getting the PS3 version and just starting the trilogy with Mass Effect 2 after playing through that intro comic, which is totally not like the intended BioWare experience at all, but it just says how obstinate I was. I didn't seek out the PC version. I didn't seek out a copy of the Xbox version to catch up with it. I just waited.
Yep.
It was a little symbolic, though. I mean, I think it's rough because you're talking about the span of months, but you can actually sort of point to like that Mass Effect 2 release period as sort of a turning point for PS3, I think. Like, it wasn't just ME2. There were other games around that time, but that's when I think PS3 started to garner some conversation in a more positive light compared to that first 3 years of just developers trash talking it, and it was clearly behind in sales, to, well, wait a second, all of a sudden this Xbox exclusive that was really like a pinnacle of that platform is now on PS3, and it's arguably the better version. In fact, it's objectively the better version by almost any measure. And then, of course, in the years that followed, I think PS3 only continued to gain more ground.
Oh yeah, and then I don't know I think it was within a year or so we also were graced with BioShock, which was another Xbox.
Oh
exclusive.
wow, that was pretty close to that, wasn't it?
And it had a kind of similar sense too. It didn't get the shiny new packaging or anything, but yeah, it was another one of those games where we were kind of looking at it from afar, going, "That looks kind of cool, but I'm already here."
Yeah, exactly.
And then it came over, and we're like, "Yes!"
And ultimately, we play it in 2011 or 2012. So yeah, Mass Effect 2 that fell into my runner-up list. Let's see, how about I'll throw a few others out there, and these might surprise you. They didn't make my top 10. Killzone 2, okay. Arkham Asylum, and the aforementioned JRPG. A true old school classic, Trails of Cold Steel. I actually put as an honorable mention because I had so much fun with that.
Right, it's really hard not to mention that one just because of how almost standoutish it is. Because I know we mentioned it in last podcast. It has so many elements from so many great games, but it still feels like its own, and it feels like even if you go back to the old Legend of Heroes games. It still feels like a Legend of Heroes games from back then, just fancier and more 3D and greater elements and voice dialogue.
Seriously, if anybody listening, you want a truly, truly solid, if not great, JRPG to play, that came out in recent years, Trails of Cold Steel on PS3 is the way to go. And we talked about it in episode 34, just a couple weeks prior when we did our big RPG dive. I Am Setsuna. What was the other RPG that you reviewed in this triage?
Final Fantasy 14.
Oh yeah, 14. Yep, for
And
sure.
what was the?
We touched on Adventures of Mana a little bit too, I think.
Yes, we did. There it is.
So Trails of Cold Steel, Killzone 2, Resistance 1, Arkham Asylum. Are any of these popping up in your runner-up list as well, or do these hold
What's
a higher
what's
spot for
what's
you?
kind of funny? Yeah, no, none of them are my top 10. What's actually kind of funny is that I didn't even write any of those down.
Oh, nuts! All right, well now I got to hear them. What missed your grouping? Because clearly these fell a little bit outside your lens.
And I don't want to, denote. I don't want to, denote Resistance one, the
I
first one, because it was
s-
so iconic.
I'm so glad
So
you didn't end that with Resident Evil 5.
oh no, not even. I didn't even remember to not mention that. No,
But yeah,
but
no, RE1 classic totally. I think it still holds up as a really strong story-based shooter. That's if it didn't hold up so well, I probably wouldn't consider it so highly and have it in this conversation, but it honestly was like probably the first story-based shooter that I actually like really fell in love with and felt the
yeah,
need to compulsively play over and over again.
yeah, oh yeah. And that was even before like Sledgehammer had gotten a hold of what we now know as Black Ops, and that was that's in terms of mainstream shooters, that's the closest thing they're gonna get to a an immersive story.
Yeah.
And I mean Black Ops, and then you have and I almost forgot World at War.
Yeah, a lot of
That
people liked World War. I hadn't really bought into the Call of Duty thing like at that point.
if anything, play that game just to the third level so you can go through that snipe level. So iconic.
Really? In World at
So
War?
good. Yes, so good. So good. I'm not gonna tell you anything because I want you to play it, but you don't really even have. I don't want to say you don't have to, like, because you'll probably get into it, but you don't necessarily have to play to the end. There are some moments, but none of them are as potent as level 3 in World at War.
Well,
So
what's interesting that about you saying that is that like I'm thinking back on modern Call of Duty history, and I mean Modern Warfare's sniping level is, I mean, isn't that like the iconic sniping level? The gillied up or whatever.
okay, I'm gonna be that guy. Like I'm in the bottom 0.1% who has never played Modern Warfare.
Oh, no wonder. Well, I can't really say that. I can't be fair and say that because I haven't played World at War. But I feel like you should probably play Modern Warfare. I'm just saying. I'm just saying. I'm just
Okay, so
saying.
we have our own new tallies.
Yeah, fair
Play
enough.
this.
Fair enough.
Play this.
So another one of my runner-ups was Ratchet and Clank: A Crack in Time.
That's too bad. And I know it's not on my list either, but it's too bad. That is the pinnacle of the franchise.
It,
It's so
it
good.
yeah, it does kind of speak to the strength of the rest of the lineup that's still outside the top 10 for me. But I'm totally in sync with you. I think before Crack in Time, my series pinnacle was actually Going Commando because I thought Up Your Arsenal was a little bit bloated and kind of
Hmm.
tread the same ground as Going Commando.
Yep.
But a Crack in Time comes out, it just has it has a more intimate story than any of the previous games, and yet still somehow grander in scope with bigger environments. Just nailed every element of gameplay.
I have a few on here that kind of surprised me. I put this list together, put a fairly sizable list this morning, and I was kind of just going through them and going, okay, well, this is definitely, I got to figure this out. I was looking at, Matt's obviously out the door. I had actually quite a few RPGs here. Dragon Age Origins was one, and I played that for hundreds of hours. I absolutely
Really?
enjoyed it.
You really
Absolutely loved it. It was glitchy as all,
interesting.
but it was so good. It's so immersive. Even though I enjoyed Inquisition and actually Platinum that one, I never really went back to play it. And I have a thing for me with RPG. If it really really gets me, play it over and 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 over. I won't stop. It's kind of unhealthy. Yeah, that was Dragon Age Origins for me, and again, that was during a period of time when the pool of PlayStation 3 games not abysmal. It was better at that point, but it wasn't vast. Not like it is now. It's like one of the 10,000 lakes you'd find in Minnesota.
Nice, nice, good
Those
call
little
out.
bogs.
Yeah, I think like I was right there with you because when you said that you played like a shitload of Origins, I was like, well, that's fair because a lot of people loved Origins, but I also feel like that could have been a function of its time where there wasn't a million other things to play at the moment, so that kind of begets rapid playthroughs. I'm not trying to delineate that entry at all. I think that like a lot of people love that game. It never really clicked with me, but it's weird. I love so many facets of RPGs, but I think what something that's critical for me is a Japanese sensibility to the combat. Like I don't click with sort of the Dragon Age point and click overhead combat that has its roots in PC gaming very heavily. That's and to be fair, I haven't really gone full bore on a game like that, so I haven't had an opportunity to learn it or appreciate it. But it still hasn't clicked with me, so Dragon Age wouldn't have crossed my mind.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I can totally appreciate that, and I I'm actually gonna eliminate. On that note, I'm gonna eliminate a Japanese RPG, which is also equal to my heart. It's so close to it. It is Tales of Grace's F.
Oh, wait, you're eliminating that, or you're giving it the honorable mention?
The honorable mention, yes.
Interesting, because people are so divided on that one.
That one was very special for me. It wasn't one of my, it wasn't one of my first reviews at PSU. It was within the first year, and I hadn't played a Tales game since GameCube with Tales of Symphonia, and
Ah,
I was
yeah,
in love with that game. Absolutely enamored with it.
for
I
sure,
played it
for
like
sure.
crazy, and it
Symphonia is
it
a
was.
Symphonia is a weird game for me where I have seen almost the entire thing played because it was a favorite of a guy that I went to a friend of mine that I went to school with, and we dormed together, and that was just his jam. And as I watched it, I'm like, this prays at the altar of Final Fantasy X. It really does. But of course, the Tales combat system is totally unique in and of itself. But yeah, I mean, well, Grace's F. I I own that game. I've had trouble getting into it. So how does that compare to Symphonia for you?
It really doesn't, because Symphonia is, and I don't want to say that in a negative sense. It's kind of, even though the Tales game, I could go on for hours about Tales because it's one of my
Sure.
acclaimed franchises. But one of the big differences between Symphonia and Graces is that they have sort of a different age influence on them. And Tales of Symphonia is very young, whereas Graces is sort of that like I don't know if there's such a thing as saying late tweens. It's not quite teen. It's still young-ish, but it's not like 9, 10. But it also introduces a combat system that's more complicated than it's ever been at this point. It was instead of just being kind of back and forth with ability to move around a circular map, you have an actual sort of almost like fighter sort of almost a fighter mechanic, being able to swing around people and counter and not you can still counter, excuse me, like being able to
Right.
swing around, being able to do all those sort of things that you'd be able to find in like
More like a modern
and
fighting game, like a Tekken kind of thing.
yeah, I think yeah, something like that. I was trying to think of King of Fighters or
Oh,
something.
sure, sure, sure.
For some reason I was stuck on that as opposed to like throwing out Tekken or something.
Right.
But yeah, it was kind of a special thing. It was kind of like my next step. Like it was like a piece of growth that I didn't. Not, I don't want to say piece of growth. What a weird thing to say. It's like a stint of growth for me where I wasn't really sure I needed it or that it was happening, but it did, and I walked away from it more fulfilled than I was before. And well, not like a lot, but it would be like here's this piece of my childhood, and now this piece of my childhood is into this, and it's a little bit further on, and it's a little bit more developed. Uh, but Yeah, and I also ultimately put this one, even before Zestiria or Zillia 2, before those, because this was the one that brought me back into the franchise after almost a decade of not playing it.
Cool. Yes. So when you say a teenage game, you're kind of referring to the series growth
Mhm.
in the broader context of RPGs, like in the broader context of its peers.
Yeah, and I've played all of them. I've played pretty much all of them now, apart from the occasional PS1 ones, like it's one or the
Oh
PS2
dear,
ones that
yeah.
didn't make it to America.
Right, right.
But
I can advocate for Hearts R, by the way, on Vita, but you reviewed that, didn't you?
yeah, I did so good.
Yeah,
That one was raw. I loved it.
it was pretty great.
Narratively speaking, it was more potent than some of the other ones.
Fortunately, no, all they did for the Vita release in North America was translate the text, right? I don't think it had any voice acting, or at least no English voice acting.
No, no, and I think it has a bit of it's a bit of a thing where people are going to go, well, I can't hear them say it, but then you're going to have people who are who live for that sort of callback to olden RPGs where you had to and you putting the voice into the words made it a little bit more personal, that kind of thing.
For sure.
So it was kind of a nice callback, even though it was a
A
setback.
budget limitation.
Yeah.
For sure, for sure. Let's see, what's remains on my list? Well, I mentioned Arkham Asylum. For me, that is actually my favorite of the Arkham trilogy, the original.
Yep. 100% same.
Really?
Yep.
Okay. Wow, Tim. Now I feel validated. I
I
just
played that game like crazy, absolute crazy. I actually platinumed it for myself and for somebody else. So I played that game like crazy.
for me, it's the focused nature. It's the more Metrovania style versus the open world, obviously not GTA style, but just the open world style of Arkham City and Arkham Knight. I think the Metroidvania structure of Arkham Asylum feeds into a narrative that's easier to keep track of and character growth that's easier to chart. Like as a focused adventure, I just have more. I'm more immersed in it, and I feel the intensity of those Batman struggles more so than I did in City or Arkham Knight.
Oh, 100%. Once the world opened up, it's kind of desensitized the whole process.
I
Wait,
agreed.
oh man, like you mentioned, the linear aspect, the Metroidvania sort of delivery of this game made it feel like a cohesive Batman experience. Like you had an end, you had all these events that went between the two. But when you got into City, or even, and I'm not gonna talk about Origins, I couldn't. Anyway, that's a segue. I once the city opened up, it became little chunks, and they came important. And with Batman, you don't really necessarily you want Batman to win, but you also want crazy enemies that he plays against. Some craziest, just biggest, messed up sort of play people that he has to go against, and you want that in a Batman game, and kind of demoting them to these little things in a greater whole kind of deteriorates the whole concept of Batman itself.
Yeah, it doesn't give the value to those individual characters that they really require, and I think the tighter structure. I mean, literally the pace of Asylum is like you get a couple hours dealing with each villain as you move in and out of like their sections of the asylum. But the asylum itself feels like such a character because it's so intricately interlocking through its hallways and its corridors and its underground pathways that it takes on almost an identity of its own, and then you get to feed into better character exposition or better villain exposition. Anyways, clearly we're of the same mindset with Asylum. The last game that I thought of that really, and I mean when I say thought of, it's like when I sat down and thought about the PS3 experiences that mean a lot to me. Those are the games I came up with that kind of populate this list. Still outside the top 10, but I gotta give a nod to The Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion.
Okay.
Not the same? Not for you?
No.
Oh, that's a bummer. Well, I mean, I shouldn't have to explain myself, but I feel like your derision kind of speaks for itself. So I need to
I was
like
a little surprised.
counter that with something.
I don't want to condescend to you. It was just a little surprising.
Well, you haven't heard what's in my top 10, good sir.
No, and you haven't heard what's not in my top 10.
All right, let's hear it. What remains for you?
I have a few left that aren't too crazy. You know, I didn't put in Grand Theft Auto 4. You know, no matter how big it was, it still had all the faults. You know, it was still fun, still really cool, still like a cool like sort of like the PlayStation 3 can do this stuff sort of display. But I also eliminated BioShock Infinite because that was my like
Oof.
pinnacle to the BioShock. There's the same apprehension I gave you.
Okay, well,
Fine.
that's in my top 10 actually. I'm about to give a preview.
Oh, this
So
is
thanks for
great.
slapping down my hopes and dreams.
Well, we're not the same people,
we t-
but I'm equally as guilty as you are at this point because I
Damn it,
started.
Tim. We are the same PlayStation fan. We have had the same PlayStation journey from 2006 to now.
Well, I mean, kind of. Actually, when you brought up the experience that you had with your friend and Tales of Symphonia, it was like I was that friend because I was that friend for somebody else.
Nice. You're like,
Hung
you
out
dude, you gotta
forever.
see this, you gotta see this, and then by sheer
Yeah.
force of will, he has to sit through the entire game.
Well, it wasn't quite like that. He was having some trouble getting through it, and I was like, "Well, can I just play it?" And he let me. It was like a 4 day weekend. I was hanging out with him up in Fargo, and I sat down. I was crazy about it. I had never played it before, and I was just flying through it. He was watching. I gotten past this part that he had done. It was I can't remember where it is, but it's this puzzle where you have to move one of those just normal Tales puzzles. Where you have to move the pieces, just to to get further in the dungeon. And the puzzle popped up. I did it in 10 seconds, which is
Oh man.
surprising because I'm terrible with
Right,
puzzles,
right.
and you know this. But I nailed out this puzzle, and he went, "How the hell did you do that? That's where I've been stuck forever."
And it's like, well, sir, let me tell you about muscle memory.
Let me tell you about luck. Yeah, I've got some
Nice.
of it right now.
For
There it
sure.
all went. But I eliminated also. It kind of hurt a little bit, not a lot, to eliminate Final Fantasy 13. It's worthy of a nod because I was really, really enamored by that game. I put 130 hours into that platinum. I was crazy about
You know,
the
I
playing
hear
of that game.
I hear that the 130-hour mark is when it gets fun.
Not the 130 mark. It got fun. I'd say not. It was still. It was moderately okay.
A ringing
What's kind of
endorsement for an
terrible.
honorable mention of best of PS3.
What's terrible about the game was the how great the longevity of that game was. Usually, when a game is when you spend a certain amount of time with the game, you start seeing the flaws and the issues, and the boredom starts to sink in. You go, okay, well, just let me get this done. Just let me do this. I go, okay, I see this mountain of crap I have to go through. It wasn't like that with 13. Like you got all the crap right in the way, right away. The 20 hours, you're just first getting into getting your gear and trying to figure things out. Once you sift through that, it kind of opens up. You go through this routine of not really, you get this roulette-ish thing of 50 different and as you go along, they get succeedingly stronger. And one of the most fulfilling fights I've ever had in gaming was the last one in that game because you had to have everything. You had to not know what you were doing. It helped quite a bit knowing exactly what you needed to do. But you go in there and he changes phases repeatedly and repeatedly, repeatedly. And you had to have these presets set properly. You really had to know the fights. So when he made a shift, you had to shift to counter it. And it wasn't like you had like turns or whatever it. You had to, like, if you had a chance to get an attack off, it's still a risk. It was a crazy fight. It was so fun because that fight was a reason why that combat system was a good one. But
So,
the fact that the game wasted it on just the core story.
so it's almost like the experiential moments of 13 were the highlights for you. Like these moments where
Uh,
it was like overcoming challenge, less so than just the game being an objectively awesome RPG.
yep, and that's why it's not in the top.
All right, fair enough.
Though there are three. You're probably going to ostracize these. I eliminated Killzone 3. You obviously eliminated Killzone 2,
Oh,
so
I didn't
it's
even think.
same
Why did
for
Killzone 3 not pop into my head at all? That's because it wasn't very memorable for me.
I eliminated God of War 3.
Okay, I've never been a God of War guy, so someone, yeah, some jilted fan out there is gonna have to tell me why that's a sin for you to keep it out of your top 10.
Well, what I really I was so enamored by God of War 3 because it ever so slightly sprinkled a bit of humanity on Kratos and it through near the end, but it never broke him in terms of what he has been as this, this raw, crazy, angry entity.
Hmm.
It never broke that sense. It gave him a little bit of humanity, but not enough to like quote change him, like making him a dynamic type character. But it made him more approachable and believable, and it was such a nice touch that Sid put into it, the director. But the fact that it was still, just a standard God of War game up until near the end was another reason why I didn't put it top 10, because even though it was a technological marvel at the time and a unique, not take even, because it's still Kratos,
Yeah, I mean,
but a unique take on Kratos, it wasn't it wasn't life changing. So it's not worthy of the nod, worthy of anything except the nod.
it's that it's that dynamism to Kratos' character that really I don't want to say prevented me, but it's what prevented the series from ever giving me a true draw. You know what I mean? It's why like I'm gonna start being a God of War player with the new PS4 reboot and none of the
100%.
previous games.
And one more that I eliminated, Uncharted 2.
Oh,
It,
what?
it it stung. I went through my whole thing and I went, "How is this not here?" And then I looked at the other ones and I went, "Okay, I see
Oh my
why." These were
gosh! Damn.
well, you can't. I mean, the gameplay in that game and the all multiplayer was both superb, but you can't say that that story wasn't very like voice acting, the whole thing. That's not the argument, but the story wasn't like immersive and it wasn't
Yeah.
just not like
I mean,
Last of
I
Us.
can't give you a lot. Yeah, like I can't give you a lot of crap because Uncharted 2 is in my top 10, but it's far from my favorite game within that group. So I can't give you too much crap because what I'm hoping your argument lends itself to is another game being in your top 10 that you haven't mentioned yet. So I'll cross my fingers and hope that that's true, but we'll see. But that's, I mean, I don't know, that's fair. I guess it really speaks to the strength of the PS3's library that Uncharted 2, as great a blockbuster as it was, gets outclassed by other games, presumably with better stories or experiences that spoke to you more.
And to kind of justify myself, I looked at this after I eliminated those and went, "What are all the exclusives? What am I thinking?" But half of them were exclusives, if not still are, at the time I played them. So
Well,
I
let's
felt,
say, what do you say we just dive into it?
let's what's your first? No, not statistically first, because that's not the game we're
Sure.
playing. We're just putting our top 10 in a bowl or a vat or whatever you want
A
to.
silo, a,
Hey, hey,
a brew
hey.
barrel.
When in Minnesota, why not?
Yes, for sure. So how about like the first one that popped in my head, the or top of the heap. I guess that's the same thing. Ultimately, for me, it was the same thing. So that's Grand Theft Auto 5.
Okay. Okay. Go on.
Well, for me, I mean, I gave both versions of Grand Theft Auto 5 when I reviewed them for PSU a 10 out of 10. They're both masterpieces. I mean, to some extent, the PS4 version being a 10 out of 10 is self-explanatory when the PS3 version already was for me. But I think what Rockstar was able to achieve, not just on the technical level of, for its time, GTA 5's City of Los Santos being the most well realized, packed with personality, fully detailed world in any game up to that point. The fact that it ran as well as it did on aging hardware is nothing short of black magic. On top of what honestly is one of the best stories and best character profiles I've ever felt in a video game. I think the move to three protagonists was genius, not just from a storytelling standpoint and being able to jump between them, but it allows you, the player, to live out different power fantasies and not feel like you're breaking the illusion of the game world. Like that was always an issue for me, Vice City, San Andreas, is that when I wanted to have there's so many ways to play GTA. You can be that just murderous rampaging asshole, or you can be someone who more plays it straight and you go through the motions of the story. With GTA 5, there's a built-in character mechanism for you to do those different things and not feel like you're totally breaking immersion. Like, why would Michael, the father, go on this murderous rampage throughout Los Santos? Well, he doesn't have to. Trevor can do that, you know? And Franklin,
That blew my mind, Kyle.
can do other things.
I I never thought of Grand Theft Auto 5 that way.
That yeah, I mean that like, it adds a ton to the cinematics and the immersion of each mission. I mean, switching perspectives in the middle of a heist, it gives a greater feeling of control over the success of those missions and for you, the player, to feel involved. But yeah, honestly, like the breaking the being pulled out of the world, breaking immersion is an issue that I had with the entries prior to that. And with GTA 5, I had these built-in ways to get around that and to have these different experiences and still feel like it all made sense.
That's a really unique look at it, and I really and this is gonna put me on that same pedestal I put myself on when I confessed to my lack of completion in Uncharted 4, but I haven't finished the story to GTA 5 either.
How do you
Do
remember
I breathe? I don't know.
how do you exist? No, do you remember like where you stopped? Like what sort of stuff was happening? Because there's points in the game, like I don't think it's perfectly paced. I think there are down moments that you have to push through, which is to be expected in a game that large. But
It's a little bit, I don't want to say a little bit my fault. It's quite a bit my fault. But with the PS3 version, I ended up I kind of had a bad experience because the online, my friends were crazy about the online on PS3, and it was still rather broken. And people were looking at this as sort of like oh, look, online with a bunch of people. Let's run around and kill them all day long.
oh yeah, there was no rhyme or reason to it. I remember those Wild West days.
Yeah, and I, I probably played like that for a month, and it killed me. So I didn't really have a good Grand Theft Auto 5 experience on PS3. It wasn't until the PS4 when I really just saw the genius of the whole thing,
Right.
and it hurt me a little. But at the same time, I know for a fact that this PS4 version is by far the better version.
Mm.
So
It,
I
it
don't think I
totally.
missed out on anything.
No, that's fair. I mean, I think like no question. I mean, that's the reason why I pushed so strongly for the PS4 version to be included in our conversation last week. Because I just felt like it's such an entity of its own, and it did breathe new life into the game. But man, oh man, I will never forget the feeling of reviewing GTA 5, having that what I think it was like a week and a half of an early window onto the game, knowing what not I mean knowing because it's GTA what a pop culture moment it was going to be, but then actually playing it and understanding like this is going to just blow people's minds. Like this is going to the no game with this great of scope has ever been this well realized. And yeah, for that reason, it actually tops my list.
I remember those 2 weeks leading into it. You and I were constantly throwing things back and forth with content.
That's right. Yeah,
Features. That was a fun time.
it was, man. That was a good team up. Nice work, Brofist through the mic.
Bro fish. I almost punched myself.
All right, so I gotta pose the same question to you then. What tops your list? What's top of the heap for you on PS3?
I feel like that's a redundant question, Kyle. You should know what my top game is on PS3.
Let's hear it. Let's hear it though.
Okay, just for the sake of continuity, Metal Gear Solid 4.
Guns of the Patriots. And it's not even your favorite series entry.
No,
That
it's
should
not.
speak to what
but
that should speak to what an epic Metal Gear fan you are.
You, it's not healthy. I'm into it. I absolutely love the franchise. I
Mhm.
live and breathe it still. Like I think about it. There have been times in my when did I start playing it? 2002. I came late to it. My first foray into it, like I know I've mentioned a few times, was when my cousin brought Metal Gear Solid 2 to our grandparents' house, and I just watched him play. I was so blown away by the level of dialogue from codec calls.
Oh yeah,
I
for
was
sure.
yeah, like, the graphics were great. The mechanics were great. Snake was great. I was completely just taken in by how believable the dialogue was, the things they were talking about. And that I can't really say that about any other game where the dialogue was my speaking, like was like vicarious for me. Like
No, I'm with you right there. For me, that same vibe, those same vibes came from the original game. I saw that played through various familial avenues when I was like 6 or 7, and I think that game taught me the word geopolitical. So that's a point in its favor. But I'm right there with you,
yes.
right? It creates such a realistic cinematic package, and you're like, no game I've ever seen or played has had this much care put into it. You know?
And it
Um,
was Metal Gear Solid 4 that put that, I don't want to say put a nice bow on it because it was way more substantial than just some,
right.
gift of socks at Christmas or something. But it's just that the final notes on things, it humanized Vamp, for instance.
Yeah.
It even humanized Snake quite a bit. It explained the black magic that was behind Liquid and Ocelot. Well,
Yep.
and I had qualms with that for a very long time. I had qualms with that. Like when I was when I my first entry PS2, it was so special for me, and so I didn't really know who Liquid was, right? I was playing two.
Right.
And,
For sure.
you have that part where Ocelot comes in. He says, "I live on through this arm." Like, okay, what's that?
Yeah, that doesn't sound like it would be easy for a newcomer to embrace.
But that was the integrity of two. Like I was able to, and that was part of the reason why I just so crazy about two, and I almost want to put two as my favorite one, even though it's the trolliest. It I was able to with just Metal Gear Solid 2 find out, not experience, mind you, because it's very different from playing one as opposed to hearing about it. But I was able to find out where these things were just by exploring all the codec options with everybody in the game. And I would spend hours, hours, hours just talking to people.
Well, in the same way that MGS4 sort of completed the narrative circle for you, well, I should put it this way instead. What wasn't powerful, what was powerful for me about MGS4 wasn't necessarily the narrative bow tying as you described it. Although certainly when you get toward the final showdown between Solid and Liquid, like that has so much weight as somebody who grew up watching the series. What was actually, I think, more resonant with me in the game is that it was doing things with interaction that no game I had played had ever done before, like the microwave tunnel with Snake. How so much emotion was placed into that moment, but not only because you were mashing square to inch him forward, but because the stakes were literally being shown to you in camera cuts around the frame as you inched forward, as you saw your friends dying, as the fates of certain friends were left unknown, right? Like, are they going to make it? I don't even know if I'm going to make it, but I have to keep crawling forward for them and for all the trials and all the shared heartfelt moments that we've had up to this point.
Yeah, it was very special. And we get to the end. You don't even to the end of that hallway, and Snake is pretty much given up, and you're just destroying your
You're
controller to
just
get him through
screaming.
it.
You're just screaming. I know, because there's no like, when does it stop? When do I need to stop pressing? I don't care. Like, just anything
And
to inch forward a little more.
that's the perfect callback to every single game torture scene. The perfect, because he's putting the torture now on himself to do it as opposed, and but even so he's still withstanding all of this for the safety of everybody else that's
Wow, that's
involved.
such a
And
good point. I hadn't considered that as a callback to the finger breaking torture scenes from the past games. That's so true though.
Oh, that game.
Beyond that, it's like I think what's incredibly impressive about it was that it took some of the moment to moment puzzle solving that's like baked into the gameplay, like figuring out what's the trick to this boss, like what's a way to use this weapon that I hadn't considered before, what's a way to use this item that I hadn't considered before, why does Vamp keep resurrecting, and what, and okay, like racking my brain, and like this is such a, these moments in Metal Gear are almost the most memorable to me, like where you have to actually stop and think, like obviously I have everything I need at my disposal to solve this, but like what am I missing, like what's the what's the narrative hook to this, like what's the trick that'll actually propel me forward. And so often it's like this bleeding between narrative and gameplay, like in the case of Vamp you've got to inject him with the nanomachines, which you can come to realize if you piece together what's actually enabling him to resurrect, which could call back to some conversations from prior in the game that don't even involve him. And so like the payoff for paying attention to the story and being deeply invested in it, it actually comes through in the gameplay. Like you can succeed at gameplay by being that invested.
Oh God, 100%.
So it ended up, Metal Gear ended up in the middle of the list for me. So I should probably talk about what bested it. One of those games is Journey.
You know, I'm gonna put myself back on that mantle. I haven't played Journey either. I really don't know why.
Tim,
I've honestly ostracized myself quite often. I really don't know why I haven't. It's one of those things that I
Tim.
know for a fact I love.
Well,
Tim.
here's the thing about that now. I think what you, one, there's no excuse and you'll never be forgiven. But two, you almost have to take this carefully now, because going in, like for example, don't go and play Journey right after we have this conversation, because it's going to be tainted by the fact that it's like my second favorite PS3 game ever. For the same reason, like when Gone Home came out and like people who heard a ton about it but didn't play it, and then like I always said, like I'm just like, give it time, like don't go in because someone else is telling you to. Go in because you have nothing else to play and you want to satisfy that curiosity, or else you're gonna the experience won't be the same for you, right? But now you can play Journey on PS4 whenever your heart desires. So just keep that on the back burner and get around to it at some point, because it's just really powerful. And I guess I can't talk about it in super great depth because you haven't played it, except to say that the it's maybe the best game I've ever played at stirring emotion within you and conjuring feeling, despite how vague it all is and despite how mystifying it all is. And I think that, if anything, it's just a testament to the god tier quality of sound and visuals, and it really just being a masterclass in like environmental storytelling. But I mean, I can't really espouse on it too much, right? Because like I said, I don't want to taint that for you. Just, you should probably play Journey at some point.
So you would tier this above like Shadow of the Colossus?
Yes, actually. Yeah, and I mean, in my personal list of all-time games, for sure, I would put Journey above Shadow of the Colossus.
No, I'm definitely gonna have to wait after that. I'm gonna be going in.
Right, because yeah. Oh, fuck you, Kyle. This is a much better game. But so like the other two that would beat, or I hate to say beat, the other two that come out on top of MGS4 for me are Uncharted 3 and Final Fantasy X HD Remaster. That's right. I went there. I threw in an HD remaster.
You know,
What do you say to that?
list? You know what kept that off my list? The fact that it was a remaster. I thought it was one of the spoken things where like, well, it's been remade. We can't really do that.
No way, man. You set your own rules on PlayStation 6. And one of my rules is that Final Fantasy X HD Remaster is worthy of a spot.
That is a fantastic remaster, though. Like, in terms of remasters, the realm, or even just in games in general,
It is probably
it's
the best.
so much polished.
Yeah, like it's probably the best. I mean, damn near every texture in that game has been repainted. The UI and HUD has been basically remade to look good on PS3. New soundtrack, all the content that never came to North America. On top of it being like really, and like don't get me wrong, there's people out there who will naysay FF10 because of their affection with other Final Fantasies. And to be frank, that's the first one I played and finished. But regardless, I think it's a seminal JRPG, and it encapsulates a lot of things about that genre that people love, and so it has the personal slant to me. I mean, obviously, there's a personal list. For so many people, it's not going to beat MGS4, but um, it's one of my favorite games of all time, and it's the very best way of playing that game. So it's kind of a
Oh,
no-brainer for me.
without a doubt. And the way you put that too, it being, like the seminal piece of Metal Gear Solid, no, seminal piece of Final Fantasy. It's on my mind right now. Just living in the nostalgia, trying to put it as, it is like a peak, really. And what makes that special, not just for those who have played it and enjoy it, is that people who want to play now can go to it. It's much more accessible than the other ones, and it's still that same quality of Final Fantasy that we come to know and love. So it's that perfect middle ground. Not quite middle ground because it's still very Final Fantasy heavy, but it's so much more accessible than other ones. I would agree. I would
Yeah,
argue even.
I think like its story is unique in the sense that it hits on some sort of melancholic feelings. It actually, and you might be able to hit me back with this, but like the whole deal behind I Am Setsuna, I mean that's just straight up an homage to the story of FF10, and that's
Oh,
something that the developers have freely talked about, like absolutely. But I can't remember what the word is, but there's a theme, there's a Japanese word that doesn't have an easy English translation, but it's somewhere between like a resignation to your fate. That they were specifically trying to convey with I Am Setsuna, and that's the same thing that FF10 hits on so well. There's a melancholic like resignation to, in this case, Yuna's fate and what she has to do, and the whole reason they're going on this journey. That's just at the it bubbles underneath the surface of the entire game of FF10, and that's not something, to my knowledge, that any of the other Final Fantasies really hammered home. So that the story is unique in that sense, but then in other respects, it's a total callback to the series because you've got your prototypical samurai character, black mage character, white mage character. Like that's very well established, if not explicitly referenced. They're never called the black mage or the white mage. So you're hitting on all those tropes while still being very unique at the same time. Very linear,
mm.
granted, but very unique.
Well, yeah, and I wouldn't say its linearity is a negative by any means because just the journey itself is so heavy that having to like looking at Final Fantasy 12, having something where it allows you to run around doing these weird things, it dejects from the potency of everything that builds up along the way. So the linearity of 10 is the only effective way to give birth to that story. Really, it's so potent in the fact that,
That's
and the
true.
fact
Yeah.
it's so fateful makes it also necessary for the linearity of it. Because then you're on this track and you go, there's really no way to get through it. We're where we're going. There's no way to stop.
Yeah, and every level that you reach, like every new area, means it's representative of like inevitability. Like no matter where you go or what you do, you're always inching one step closer to the inevitable, the end.
Like there are certain points along the game where reality started to inch and inch closer, but where it really sunk in for me was the Thunder Plains, and what did it was the music.
Really interesting.
And they don't really talk about it much in there, but it's that one step before the Far Plains, and they're so close, and that it's there. They try not to talk about it, and Yuna's getting really quiet, and things are just starting to feel a little bit more heavy than they have been without really talking about it, and the music really sets the tone. And
I couldn't agree with you more, man. That I mean, the game's chock full of powerful moments like that. And the HD remaster just takes it to the next level. I mean, that's why it earns my spot. I do think I have to touch on Uncharted 3 a little bit, though.
sure.
Is that in your top 10?
No.
Oh,
No,
okay.
which is why I mentioned Uncharted 2 not being in here
Right, well, that's
because
because I mean, there's a small part of me that hoped it's because you like Uncharted 3 better and you put that higher, but I guess not. No. I mean, that's fair. To me, Uncharted 3 addresses your main criticism with 2. The story. To me, the story of Uncharted 3 just felt much better written. Nathan Drake's internal motivations much better explored, and it became a more personal journey because of that, with all of the polished adventuring and platforming that 2 had. So
Oh, certainly. Yeah, that's without a doubt. It was much better storytelling. The Talbot stuff was a little bit left field. And I wish they had at least hinted a little more as to his origins and what he was actually doing, apart from just using, um, uh, sort of drug, hallucinogenic thing.
yeah,
But
I won't deny it. There are unanswered questions. I won't call them plot holes because I don't believe they're plot holes, but they are. There's stuff left to the imagination. There's no doubt about
yeah,
that.
and granted that level of mystery still makes it relevant, even even in this day and age. You look back and you go, well, what about this? What was doing this? But enough there's enough grounding in everything that's going on to validate what's going on. You still have that hyperbole that comes out of the whimsy from all Uncharted games. You have zombies in the first one. You have, oh my God, what was the Yetis and
Yeah, the
the
souped up
stuff going on,
people. Yeah,
and then you have whatever the drug was doing to Nathan
right. The
at the end.
hallucinogenic demons. The
Yeah,
down in the yeah. Spoilers,
yeah.
obviously, but
There's
yeah.
always that hyperbole at the end, and it dejects from the whole thing, and I think, and it's mystifying. It has this sort of like, whoa, they've really come across something sort of feel to it, but it also gets too, I don't know, too fantastical.
Too fantastical for you.
I do, and I don't want to say I'm not big into science fiction, but there has to be verisimilitude, and the fact that it's there doesn't really do it for me. Like you can create something and say that it's there, but the fact that it's there in the middle, like you have this foresty place in the middle, Shangri-La in the middle of this barren, cold place. That doesn't
Yeah.
it doesn't make any sense.
Suspension of
Like,
disbelief is a little strong there.
yeah, and it was kind of a common thing with 2 and 3. Honestly, this might be one of the subconscious reasons why I haven't finished 4. I'm just kind of anticipating this sort of like, okay, I get it, you're doing this thing, sort of response, and I really don't want to be the reason I'm not getting 4, but I just worry about it. And
I can't I can't comment except to say that you should play 4. You should finish 4, sir.
okay, well, I'll probably finish it. I mean, I not probably. I'm gonna finish it, but I don't know. I'll let you know. Anyway,
Keep me in the loop. Keep me posted. But yeah, what comes so MGS4 top of your heap. I've given you sort of my top 5, but what comes under MGS for you?
there are a few surprising ones in here, and they're more almost spiritual for me in the sense that they're not like. And I'm not saying that they're not fan favorites, but some of them aren't in the top conversations that
They're not
I've
in
seen.
anybody's top 10 lists.
Well, no, that's not true either, because I have things like Heavy Rain.
Ah, okay.
I have Elder Scrolls Oblivion.
Oh, so you were upset about my exclusion of that. I thought you were giving me shit for even including it at all. I'm like, come on, Tim,
No,
it's a seminal RPG.
the exact opposite.
Interesting,
That
interesting.
was that was I never got into Morrowind because I hadn't done any PC gaming
Oh, so
at
this was
all,
your
and I barely do it now.
eye-opening Elder Scrolls moment then.
Yep. And I remember going, and this is kind of going into that same conversation we were having earlier about BioShock and Mass Effect. I was at a friend's house and some more time I had in Fargo, and he was playing Oblivion, and I was crazy about it, but it was on Xbox 360, so I tried not to care.
Yep.
I tried to only care while I was watching, even though I cared way more than I wanted to, just because I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I made a user on his console, and I played it throughout the night every time he was when he would go to sleep. I play it, forever and ever and
Oh
ever.
man,
I
I
was
feel you.
absolutely just crazy about it. But it's like still over there. Came on PS4 finally, and they made it better than it was on 60. I'm like, that's right, Xbox, the whole time. And I played it, and I loved it. I was absolutely, and you have the draw issue, which was still there, not as bad. You got the draw issue. You have some lag issues. You have the same voice actor doing almost everyone's voice. You have, you know,
There was the vampire glitch too, where if you turned into a vampire along that quest, you couldn't undo it. At least in the Game of the Year edition on PS3.
yep, that's the thing too. But and it's kind of the same kind of endearment that Skyrim had overcome, and it really didn't have to because the fans did it for him. But Oblivion was my Skyrim.
Interesting.
It was such a pivotal moment for me. It was that really the first Western RPG that I dug into.
Yeah, for sure.
I
No,
was
I'm
absolutely in love with it.
I'm right there with you. I think my trajectory was pretty similar. I Morrowind was my Oblivion because I was right there with you. Like I couldn't play Oblivion and I wanted to so badly. So I made do with Morrowind until Oblivion eventually came to PS3 and then it was just game over for me, man. I mean to be lost in that world in first person, it was an experience I never had that experience ever before. I think that's true of a lot of people. I mean, the Elder Scrolls was really like a pioneer in a lot of ways, immersing you so heavily in such a well realized place.
Oh, certainly. And the reason I put Oblivion on here is it's kind of the representation of the franchise, this same can be said about Uncharted. I excluded it I excluded everything else by excluding Uncharted 2. And then I chose Oblivion because it is representative for me of Skyrim. It's like I think of
Interesting.
Skyrim and I think, well, Oblivion's better. Or like not better. I don't want to say better because I'd say Skyrim was more realized, but Oblivion was like that was me. Like that was the whole time when I was playing Skyrim. I was just kind of like, okay, I was into it. I was into it, but not in that same sort of like this is mine sort of mentality. Like I was completely driven in Oblivion as opposed to Skyrim, and that's why Oblivion is representing Bethesda.
Yeah, it's that's a tough choice for me because I actually put Skyrim in my top 10 toward the bottom because and Oblivion was right outside of it because I'm with you where Skyrim is a better realized world. It's a more complete vision of a region of a country, but now that I think about it, I think if I had to choose one to only have with me for eternity, it might be Oblivion because of the personal memories that I hold with it, because I lost myself in its world even more so than I did in Skyrim.
Right. No, totally. That's definitely what my thinking was. And when I was looking at the list in general, I was going, well, if for instance I was a big Uncharted fan, I could just put Uncharted 1, 2, and 3 in my list, but that would take two spots away from something else or two other
Indeed,
things.
yeah, for sure.
So I just took like if I went from if I was a fan of a series, say like Oblivion, I had Oblivion represent the whole thing. And instead of having, because it's not to denote Skyrim, but Oblivion was more special to me.
Right.
So I chose Oblivion to be my representative.
Cool. I feel you. I feel you. Solid choice. Like I said, we make your own rules on PlayStation Fix. So you excluded BioShock Infinite from your top 10 conversation. Is that right? Am I remembering that
I
right?
I did, yeah, and what it kind of hurt me a little because it was the first BioShock game that got me into it. I didn't play BioShock 2, and it's kind of a it's kind of a chody to say, but because it had multi trophies, I didn't bother. But at the
Hmm.
same time, it wasn't made by Ken Levine, so I didn't have that sort of justification either. But I played BioShock. I was into it. I was really into it until the end. And if this is a spoiler for anybody, you've waited too long. It was at the end when he reveals himself as Ryan. started to realize the flaw in the game's execution. The fact that it allows you to run around while people are talking to you. Like you don't have to care about what they're doing. I was worried about things happening. I was worried about all this stuff that I had beforehand coming up again during this reveal that I missed the potency of it.
Hmm.
And once it was all over, I went, well, shit. Like it was just not. I find the ending to BioShock a not very well thought out ending in terms of gameplay execution onto narrative. And I know that concept was still rather new at the time. And when we got it, it was still it was what, a 3-year-old game.
Yeah, at
But
least.
still though, I mean I can't change how I felt about it. But on that contrary, I want to go back and play it again now that Infinite I just took me over. I was so into an Infinite, and the closing to that was so much better executed because of the way that Ken Levine was able, and team, of course, it wasn't
Sure.
just him,
Right.
be able to put the narrative with the gameplay in a way that wouldn't that in points allowed me to move it, but at the same time didn't allow me to take away from what I should be seeing. So BioShock Infinite, when compared to BioShock, is perfect.
It was the one for me. It was the thematic exploration of Infinite that really drove it home for me. I mean, Bioshock does this too, and in some ways, Bioshock is like the big name when it comes to exploring real world themes. I mean, with Bioshock, it's objectivism, it's Ayn Rand and her writings and her philosophies. With Infinite, it's more American exceptionalism, and it critiques that probably with a little less nuance than Bioshock One did its thing. But the world of Columbia for me was almost like a thesis in the dangers of subscribing wholeheartedly to a single person or a single dogma, like a single ideology.
Yep.
And I wouldn't say that I wouldn't say that gameplay hugely reinforced that for me. I think just in terms of how violent Infinite is, actually does some service to that because it's the violence and the in your face sort of visceral nature of using the skyhook and just how much impact those guns have, the blood, the viscera, that that interrupts this sort of perfect, cheery Americana world in a way that sort of shocks you back to reality and makes you realize that there's a seedy underbelly to this stuff,
Hmm.
and people will be willing to go to violent lengths to uphold their illusions and uphold their sort of Americana vision. So I guess when I roll it around like that in my head, yeah, to me narrative and gameplay were really perfectly intertwined in Infinite, and among the games on this list, it's the one that really effectively explored some real world themes for me.
Hmm. And it kind of hurt my heart to keep it out of the list just because of how
Yeah, no
potent it
kidding, man.
was
I was
for me.
wondering why. I mean, you had such great things to say in your espousal there, but
But really, though, like it not being in the top 10 does clearly from the games that we've, I don't want to say denoted, but excluded from our list, shows testament to the strength of library that the PS3 had.
and there's only a couple on my list that we haven't between the two of us talked about yet. So going down from the top, I did kind of rank them, although to some extent I'm even questioning where I put things now. Like I don't think I should have put MGS4 as low as I did. But my best 10 includes Grand Theft Auto 5, Journey, Uncharted 3, Final Fantasy 10 Remaster, Metal Gear Solid 4, BioShock Infinite, Uncharted 2, Skyrim, and then the last two that we haven't mentioned in any capacity yet are Deus Ex Human Revolution and The Last of Us. Those kind of come in and round out the list.
Oh, Last of Us is a piece of literary art.
I don't
And
disagree. I just think it doesn't make for the most memorable game.
no, and I mean, that's honestly okay.
Sure, yeah.
Because it's really not supposed to be about having a good time. It's about
That's
making
very
it.
true.
It's about finding a way. It's about almost self-defeating survival, and that's kind of the final hook of the game.
Hmm.
You pretty much defeating yourself by saving who you love, and
I mean,
it's
I think what's the thing that lingers with me most about The Last of Us, and really what helps it earn this spot, is its narrative and its characters. The ending in particular, it's this total spoiler territory, so tune out if that's an issue. The Joel's ultimate decision to lie to Ellie is such a pivotal moment that that entire story hinges on. Because throughout the game, as Joel, we encounter these pockets of humanity and these survivors who have either risen above their baser instincts, the kind of violent, self-sufficient tendencies that tend to overtake you when the apocalypse happens. Some have risen above that and others haven't. He's really played witness to both sides. He's seen the worst of humanity and, in some ways, the best of humanity, managing to peek through that darkness. When he makes that decision to lie, the interpretation of his lie to Ellie is totally on the player. So and that's really the game's final question. It's like, has Joel is Joel has is Joel the best of humanity in that he did everything he could to preserve Ellie's innocence and keep her light shining in that world, or is he the worst of humanity because his lie is selfish and he doesn't want her to die because she keeps him company and he loves her as a daughter, and he's self-sufficient in that respect, he's selfish in that respect. So which Joel is it, right? That lingering question sticks with me and earns The Last of Us a place in this list. I just find it really gloomy. Almost, you did say that was the point, and I agree with you to some extent that is, you can't have this kind of story without that darkness. But man, it is not a game that I have really any inclination to replay as much as I enjoyed it. And that sort of unrelenting gloominess, it's almost like a Batman v Superman kind of issue of like, let's just lighten up for a second. Like, the outlook of the world is hard to get attached to for me.
I can definitely see your point, and it's perfectly valid, and it's that very point that brings me in. I am I don't want to say depressive or depressing type of person, but I absolutely love melancholy and anything that is just that raw and real. I love raw emotion. I love, like, especially in storytelling. I absolutely just adhere to it. So when Uncharted came around, excuse me, I was thinking about Naughty Dog, and that came out. When I was thinking about
When
Last
Crash
of
came
Us,
around,
Crash had to decide if he wanted to kill Ellie. When I was when Last of Us came around, I was expecting kind of one thing because advertisement at the time was very Kevin Butler-y, which is very far from adult.
right.
It's entertaining. I won't denote him for it because it was great and it did PlayStation a ton of favors. But The Last of Us is the exact opposite of that. Very, very real. You don't. I loved the fact that the comic relief was just little touches. They didn't break things. It kept that heaviness. I love the significance of it. I felt like I was along with it. When you have those little breaks for me, I'm just speaking for myself in these general terms. When you have these little breaks in there, it kind of goes, okay, it's really not that serious. It's not really that big of a deal. But when you commit from start to finish in this same sort of darkness, you know that there's
Right.
no choice but to overcome it. And on this note, little segue, it's the same reason why I was completely enamored by Mad Max. Just right off the bat, you know where things are. They're put on thick, they're put on heavy, and there's no way around it. So you know
Yeah.
that the whole thing is going to be from here to there, a trench crawl.
I guess, yeah, I mean, there's something to be said for a cohesive vision of the world. I think it's like, it's not, I don't like to think of it in binaries because it's not like that dark view of the world, was a totally negative point for me because I do see some of the positive in it. And I appreciate that cohesive vision, but I guess, yeah, it's just, I don't want to say it does get to be, it does though. It does get to be a bit much. And for me, it actually affects the pacing of The Last of Us a little bit, and even the predictability of it to some extent. That kind of vision makes that you're in for an 18-hour journey of just dour, dark circumstances. And to some extent, it becomes almost a slog to get through certain parts of it because of that, and because you're really just trying to get to the ending and see how these characters, what their ultimate development is. Honestly, the cutscenes of The Last of Us are the best part,
Oh, without a doubt.
and how they push the story forward. Because getting to those moments is what felt like a bit of a slog to me, because you just knew you were in for another depressing thing.
One of the smartest things about that game was when they took. I don't want to. And if these are spoilers, still, when Joel gets injured and you take control of Ellie, that was a great change of pace. A great change of pace, and it really it kept the game from getting mundane at that point. So you have this different, again, much like how everything else has been to this point with Resident Evil. Why are these weird names coming out of my mouth? You have with the general theme and execution of The Last of Us. When you take control of Ellie, there is almost no downtime. You have the little point where you hunt the deer, and then a ton of zombies come after you. And it's that same sort of heaviness. And with those kind of parallels that it's not just Joel's experience. And sure, she's been along with him, but at this point, she's not with him. It's everywhere. And sure, they go to different places, but it's not just him thinking that the world's against him. It's everybody. So having that continuity and the change in gameplay execution while still being generally the same makes it a little bit more, increases the longevity of it all and furthers the vision, I think, because you also personalize with Ellie as opposed to just being with her. So then the choice at the end becomes more, just more.
All the more emotional, all the more invested. I mean, I don't even feel like I need to ask for clarity, but it does seem like you've got The Last of Us higher on your list than I do.
Well, again, I don't really have these ranked except for Metal Gear Solid, but it's in the top 5 for a reason. It's definitely up there, but this list of 10, after I kind of swallowed these games up and looked at them and looked at the ones that I took out, I even took Bayonetta out, and that game was special to me. But
yeah, for sure.
But
what rounds out the list for you? Because I've kind of ran through my top 10, but what about yours?
Well, I'm just gonna get some of the lesser ones of merit out because I'm sure a lot of these won't be on a lot of lists. You have Heavenly Sword, which was kind of that first piece of what the PlayStation 3 could do. Heavenly Sword.
Okay.
It was special, and I'm looking at this top 10 as a very personal thing.
Sure. I mean that was. I won't deny that game was a proving ground for PS3 hardware, and like when we talked about last week, when it was the early years of PS3 were all about these sort of paradigm shift experiences. I can totally see how Heavenly Sword would have been that. I just actually have never played it.
And it was heavy. It's heavy stuff. Yeah, I'd recommend it if you have an opportunity to do so. If you ever get PlayStation Now, it's on there. Speaking of which, Trails of Cold Steel is on there.
I saw that. I'm like, oh gosh, wish I wouldn't have just spent $40 on this.
PlayStation Now is fairly relevant, and they're constantly offering. And this is just not a plug. I promise I have it, so that's the reason I'm saying it. It has a lot of stuff. It has a lot of games in there I've never played. I've seen Journey in there, which is it's on there. I can get it now. I have no excuses. Things like that, But anyway, I digressed pretty hard. But Heavenly Sword was the you had at that point I think we had the demo for Uncharted, like a taste of where things could go. And Uncharted, the first one wasn't like crazy. It was still great. The pants got wet. Things like that. It was huge. It was huge, and I was right there with you. Like that, I rolled around in the water for a while and stood there just to watch my clothes dry, and special moments. It was those little things, really.
Awesome, out of context, by the way. The pants got wet.
I promise it was in game mostly. So I'm looking at Heavenly Sword, and um, I don't know. The execution for it was very timely, obviously because there weren't many other games. But I'm a big fan of Andy Serkis, which played a lot to my likeness of it. And then you have the first real taste of Hollywood mocap. The first real taste. You had mocap for game. PS2 games had it. Metal Gear Solid 3 had it. I can't think of any others right now because I have Metal Gear Solid on the mind. But there were. It was just kind of a basic sort of thing but in Heavenly Sword, you had the full mocap, you had the facial recognitions, the facial mappings, the whole thing, and on top of it being a combat heavy, a great combat heavy game, it was also almost Hollywood like in its visual execution, and it's kind of a special thing. And one of the this is another reason why you should play it in a couple of points. It's not kind of early on, but like in I think the first or second boss fight or second event. It's been years, but there's an event where you're fighting and the screen is partitioned so that you have a part where you're fighting and the other part is watching Andy Serkis go verbally crazy. And it was a very special moment in the game. It kind of early on, but you kind of get a taste of what's to come, and it kind of carries over. And then as it goes along too, you start to see more of the human side in Nariko, what she's losing, what she's going to lose, what she's lost, and it goes into her like prologues before each chapter, and she has these little instances where she talks to you, the player, about her circumstances and what she's losing and what she's going through, and it's very personal. It's very personal.
I guess I wouldn't have expected that just from the brief, little snippets that I've seen of her in, marketing materials and trailers and that kind of thing. I never got that sense from the game that it was a good character examination.
Oh yeah, and it's mostly heavy on her, really. They don't spend a lot of time going into breaking down Andy Serkis' character, because he's just a corrupt king, and there's really nothing too complicated in his role. He's just really good at it. But the variety of enemies, the variety of bosses, the complexity of Nariko's scenario, early on in the PlayStation 3 life cycle, was kind of a special thing, and that is the impact in when it happened was the reason that this made my top 10. Not in the fact that it held up among other ones at the end of the life, but the fact that it kind of set the tone for the rest of them.
Nice. No, I feel you. So what else?
Another one that I think would be easily denoted, and this is kind of unique for me, and this is why it's on 10, Catherine.
Oh, man! Why the hell wasn't Catherine on my list?
And that's unique for me.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you're not the puzzle guy, right?
No, not even close. Like, The Witness can go straight to hell in a handbasket. But Catherine, I hated the puzzles, but I wanted to do them. I smashed my head into my TV to get to the next part because the game was so well put together. And the puzzles are a perfect metaphor for the things that he's putting himself in.
They really are.
So
I've made a huge mistake. It's nowhere on my list, and it should be. What have I done?
It's not even a worthy mention, Kyle.
No, I'm right there with you. I think like what the game does really well. You've got Vincent and his own examinations of the mistakes he's making, his kind of inner monologues, and then you pair that with those nightmares. I mean, the game, it's not a horror game by any stretch of the imagination, but like the puzzles and the monsters that chase you in Catherine's puzzles are like perfect manifestations of like inner guilt and inner sort of stomach twisting and just all these things that Vincent's going through, and in one way or another virtually everybody has felt similar feelings at some point in their life. So that's just really powerful, on top of a really cool art style and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And I honestly, if it weren't my lack of affinity for puzzle games, this wouldn't be in my top 10. This would be it would be a worthy mention. But the fact that I hated the puzzles so much, but still wanted to do them, on top of the wonderful, complex scenarios that I was going through in this game, just put it all together for me. And the fact that I was willing to endure so much just made this a pivotal game for me. And I remember, this is a very personal thing. We were in between financial situations, and I was dead broke. And we were pretty much just living on what my then girlfriend, now fiance at the time, was making.
Mm.
And I remember I talked about this game for about a month and some of the things, and I was really bummed out because I didn't have any money for it. And
Right.
she said, "Well, I have some money. We'll go to Walmart," because that was all we had in little Marshall, Minnesota.
No, I feel
We'll
you.
go to Walmart.
I grew up with dial-up, so you've got no explaining to do.
It's so gross to think about dial the nightmares.
That's all right. I had high speed when I was 18 in college.
Oh, I had to wait a little longer.
Anyway,
But yeah, she picked it up for me, and it also has that side of it for me. But I tried to keep that out of my judgment for the game itself and putting in my top 10, and it still had the potency to retain its position.
that's awesome,
But
man.
but there's another game that I put on this list that I'm sure plenty of people have forgotten about. And it was early in the first couple of years, and this was during that not same time period, that dead time period, but it was actually at the beginning. Uh, the, just the simply named Prince of Persia game
Interesting.
that came
Wow.
out.
Okay,
Yeah,
you
that
weren't
one.
kidding when you said your best 10 is going to be a bit of an outlier.
Yeah, and I'm starting with these because I have two. I have two more that are a little bit more obvious.
Sure, sure.
But Prince of Persia was that sort of surprise because I played it and I was really into the gameplay. Just it was so smooth, so pristine. It was something I hadn't really had in a PlayStation 3 game before. Really, even in a PS2 game, in terms of games that are like platforming types of games, it was very smooth, and yeah, especially for a 3D platformer, it was so easy to get. It was so easy to get into it. It wasn't easy by any right. The game was rather challenging, but it wasn't the game's fault for my failings. And I remember that often. I would look at that like a scenario I'd go through, and I'd screw up, and I knew why it happened. But that's a side note. Like it has a sort of, I don't want to say it's as deep as it was with like Shadow of the Colossus, but there's this sort of like self-defeating gradual path that the prince takes throughout the whole thing, trying to save. I can't remember her name. I don't think she even had a name. Like he didn't have a name. She did. I can't
Was she Farah like in The Sands of Time? Because wasn't it kind of like a reboot?
Yeah, there we go. But it was kind of this sort of self-defeating thing, and once it gets to the end, this sort of climax, and it's a similar sort of like Joel and Ellie situation where he's like, well, what do I do? Like should I what like there's this better, and then there's my better, and then things like that. There's her better, there's my better, and I don't. And being faced with that complexity and something that was already surprising was a very special thing for me. So, and it's never gone away. That's a game because of its potency for me. I've always wanted to platinum it. I've always wanted to give it that sort of like on my shelf location
Yeah,
where
that-
it's like this is a representative of me. Like
Right.
this needs to be part of my life.
Man, it's just so cool to think that you've got several games in your best 10 that I haven't even played. And like I was with PS3 since day one. I mean, that's awesome to even think about.
Yeah,
it's
that's
really
a great
it's really
thing.
giving me a reason to pause. Like I kind of want to go find Prince of Persia. Just find an easy way to play it today.
It's gonna be dirt cheap too, so you'll have that for your
Fair
benefit.
enough, yeah.
It's totally worth the while, and if you can get the epilogue too, that was not as good, but still good. So if you can get it with the game, bonus.
For sure.
The other one that's I don't want to say this one's surprising, not as surprising as Prince of Persia, but Dead Space.
Dead Space is a seminal horror game. There's no doubt about that.
And I was driven from the word go to get through that game.
Awesome.
I just the weapon system was unlike a lot that I had seen at that point. It was just easy to get into, hard to do. The game was like that too, easy to navigate, hard to do.
Now you're a Resident Evil 4 guy, right? I mean,
Uh-huh.
to some extent, that's do I even need to ask, right? Like, who isn't a Resident Evil 4 fan? But like, what really appeals to me with Dead Space, and what I think like its real calling card to this day, is that it took the gameplay foundation of like a Resident Evil 4 and some of the sort of design sensibilities, and then took them to a psychological horror place and like a true old school horror place that RE4 didn't necessarily go. I mean, RE4 was kind of the first Resident Evil game with more of an action slant than a viscera nasty psychological horror slant. Like it was way more action than Silent Hill on that spectrum, but Dead
Oh,
Space took it back there.
oh yeah, and that was its successful card really that it had to play, and in a converse sort of method, Resident Evil 5 went in the opposite direction, focusing on the action based because that's what they thought people liked about 4, when really it was the balance of 4, because 4 mechanically isn't stellar.
No, to
It's
be honest, I
it's
didn't know. It was for its time. I mean, it was kind of revolutionary, but yeah, it got quickly outclassed by other games, including Dead Space.
Yeah, quickly. Like it was like within the same year because they kept releasing it. They had it on GameCube and then they brought it out on PS2. And I'd say by the time it hit PS2 is when we started seeing the faults in its gameplay.
Right. And then it was PS3, and now it'll be PS4 soon. I mean,
Yep.
yeah, for sure.
So, yeah, but Dead Space dialed it back to where people wanted it to be, where it should have been all along. And it gave that sort of like Nightmare on Elm Street sort of ending where you felt like you were okay and then shit hit the fan again, just a little bit of it, so you know that it's going to keep going. Like, you don't in a good horror movie, good horror anything, you don't quite expunge the enemy. It always is there. It
Right.
always comes back. Whether in his case, I think at the end it was more his head, but
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I think you're right though. There's an omnipresence to the threats in Dead Space, where they're kept mysterious enough that even your triumphs don't feel permanent, and you can feel like these brief moments of rewarding victory, but it's like you can never truly feel satisfied, even with the ending. Like the threats are
yeah.
still there.
So then when you have that kind of ending, you think, well, how much of what I just did was outside my
For sure.
So giving that sort of hook on the end of it all was just a nice touch to something that was already successful.
I do have to say, you've got to stop dropping RE5 into conversation because I keep worrying that that's going to be your final. Like, I'm like, oh God, get that out of here.
Okay, no Resident Evil games. Not even mentioned. No Resident Evil games. I'm just gonna alleviate your worries.
Good. All right. Good to know. Good to know.
Okay, I have three more. Then you've done.
Yeah, I feel like I've given my whole list. I mean, the only game that I haven't really.
If you want to save it, I can totally go through my other ones too.
No, for sure. Yeah, yeah. Let's hear what you've got.
Okay, because I wouldn't say that these are pivotal either, but Final Fantasy 14 was a big deal. Still is a big deal.
Sure, sure.
It being a fully realized MMO on something that really shouldn't be able to run one. It being
You can say that again.
it being, like as you know, the Final Fantasy movement that it really is a testament to
Right.
what they've made
The
on
fact
the
that that
PS3.
game, literally the fact that that game even exists on PS3 after the 2.5 years of us thinking it would come to PS3, because that was the whole thing, right? Like while the original version of 14 on PC was doing this nosedive into mediocrity,
Yep.
PS3 fans, all we knew was that it existed and that we had been told it was going to come to PS3. So that was, among the many failed promises and many just disappointing elements that that game has in its legacy. The fact that it never came to PS3, at least in those initial years, was one of those things that made it kind of this, just this almost symbolic of where Square Enix had come in terms of taking things for granted and just believing that they could make anything and fans would eat it up. And to this day, the only reason we're able to talk about that and we have that picture of its development is because Naoki Yoshida came in and really turned that game around, turned it into, essentially went and looked at the current situation, and because of his work on the game, because of that reboot, was able to pivot a lens back onto Square Enix, examine some of their business practices, examine the things that they were taking for granted, their development inefficiencies, and really, you alluded to it when you described it being this kind of a standout PS3 title. It's not just a great MMO and not just an amazing technical achievement that it even exists on PS3, but it's also has greater industry significance for being symbolic of the Square Enix that was to come. And we haven't really seen the fruits of that quite yet, but we're told through many interviews and through many kind of developer documentaries that the Square Enix of today is a different company. They're one that takes gamers' opinions first, takes fan feedback first. The thing is, I never played. I mean, I have been a 14 player for what would it be now? I guess almost 3 years, because I picked it up on PC right after that kind of 2.0 version came out. So I never actually played it on PS3, and it didn't occur to me for that reason. But yeah, I mean, certainly it's a huge achievement that it even exists at all.
Oh yeah, I mean they just threw the Phoenix down on the old project and it came back better than it was.
Absolutely.
So the what made it even more special for me is that, like again, this list is quite a personal one for me, and it was kind of a cool little journey for me to put this together. But as many people know, I spent way too many years playing World of Warcraft. I spent way too many years giving money to a game that I enjoyed playing. And I don't want to say that badly, but I didn't hate giving World of Warcraft my money for the first 2 expansions. Those were some of my best gaming memories. I loved those first 2 expansions.
Yeah, I look back fondly on Burning Crusade era as well.
What a special time it was. Even the farming was fun. But it's that melancholy that I pull on, that nostalgia, when I think about, almost said Metal Gear Solid again, when I think about Final Fantasy XIV, because it revalidated the monthly subscription for me. I looked at a ton of games between WoW and 14 and went, this isn't worth X amount of dollars a month. This isn't worth X amount of dollars a month. But I still wanted that sort of venue that was so engrossing that only cost me $15 a month. Like, because thinking about it, $15 a month for entertainment is dirt cheap. So because if you buy a game
For that kind of all-consuming entertainment, yeah, it totally is, and that tends to be. I mean, I'm right there with you. Like, that's what World of Warcraft was for me. That's what FF14 has been for me. Is that kind of that entertainment that replaces other things I could be spending money on. So for sure, it does end up being cost effective.
Right, but it's not just the fact that you pay money for a service. It just the service has to be worth that $15. Like it's not automatic. If you throw $15 at a game, it's not going to automatically be good, right?
Right.
So it's kind of hard to get that formula correct. WoW lost that formula ages ago, but 14 has had it since A Realm Reborn, since it rekindled, and it's only gotten better because they've added things in. I cannot tell you how much I enjoy the job system in 14.
Right.
I've never enjoyed fishing like I do in 14, and that's the kind of level of detail in 14 that is everywhere. It's not just these little things. And I would say that would be the reason why, obviously, that 14 is on this list, but you have, just the fact that it wills me to pay $15 a month, $13 a month to play it because I only have the one character.
And right. But
that's a nice option too. But
yeah, for sure. But that's not a small thing. That's not a small achievement to be able to compel that kind of loyalty. And I mean, I can speak to that better than most. I mean, they've had their hooks in me now for coming on 3 years, and
And I mean, if you look at the math of it, right, over a year, it's something like what, $280 or $268. I can't remember. But if you look at it in such an obtuse way, sure, that's a lot of money a year. But if you buy one full-priced game a month, that's whatever 12 times 60 ends up being. I can't think of it right now, but definitely
we'll just call it too much.
No, that would be half of 1440. I don't know.
720.
Thank you.
You're right.
Thank you. I just knew 12 times 12 things. Anyway, but it's such a small amount for entertainment. But again, it's not the fact that you're paying for it to entertain you. Like, it has to be good for you to pay for it, and it definitely is. I wouldn't. I don't really want to say that it is for everybody. It doesn't have that sort of like, give me gear now sort of WoW mentality. But it's so engaging that it makes the grind, the time spent doing everything, the just the general development so much more worthwhile. Like, you actually invested yourself into this character. You're creating something as opposed to just kind of like putting stickers on it.
Yeah, and getting story payoff from the quality of the narrative.
Man, yeah, that blew me away. Like, I was not every MMO I've played, story-driven MMOs joke.
Right.
But
it's just talk.
yeah, but 14 really is the cat's meow in terms of 50s lingo. But I just, yeah. Yep.
So what space is left after 14?
That would be Heavy Rain.
You know, it's great. I can't deny that. It's great. It just didn't pop into my head as one of my defining experiences for that generation.
Honestly, it's garbage now. It is garbage. It's so clunky now. It felt so technologically inclined when we played it.
I know, you're right. You're so right. I'll say this: Detroit Become Human looks like it's going to be the spiritual successor that Heavy Rain deserves. And I mean deserves in the sense that we need something to better remember what Heavy Rain is, right? We need we need Heavy Rain as we remember it to be. And I think that's what Detroit's going to be. So,
and that's what really made Heavy Rain special, though. Like, you know, I've played plenty of games that all had, you know, plenty of options, and every time I made the wrong decision or something, I go, oh well, okay, fine, I'll just deal with it for the rest of the game. You know, it's just kind of just a whatever. But if this is a spoiler for anybody, it's your fault. When you get to that point where you have to kill that guy just to find out where where to find out where his son is.
Oh,
I sat there for 15 minutes with the camera spinning around us. I had him at gunpoint. I'm like, what do I do? Do I act? But you know, I obviously learned that after being there for so long, you don't have a choice at that point, which was kind of an iconic moment because up to that point, you pretty much had free reign to make choices.
right.
So I crafted this narrative up to this point, and I went, no, where are my options? Where are my options? And it showed me just how detrimental the situation was. And then, you know, obviously I pulled the trigger and I dropped my controller. The screen went white. And I kind of just stared at what was going on. I kind of just took it in. It had that sort of surrealism that just took me. I was so into it. And then at the very end, and this is mine because, you know, it's going to be a little different for everybody, if not completely different. I got to the end and he's running out to tell the police that he found his son and he needs to get the son out of the grate because the water is flooding in. And I'm just failing with names right now, but she can't get to the cops in time to let them know that it's not him, the father, who kidnapped his son.
Sean, the father.
Sean, thank you. So when Sean goes out to tell the cops where his son is, they shoot him. So it was all this sacrifice and all these issues for nothing. And he just, not nothing because his son still makes it, but he put forth all this effort just to be mistakenly killed. And Ethan, it's so raw and so real.
You got your heart ripped out by that game, Tim.
Dude, but I loved it. I loved it for that sense. Just it was like actually being a part of it. And it helped that I had all the lights off and it was at night and I couldn't stop playing, but I was just into it. I couldn't stop. It stomped on my heart, and I loved it for it.
You
And
are
this game
really
also had a very special thing for me because this was also during the point where I was going, in a period of my life where I constituted myself as a trophy whore,
right, right.
and I couldn't go back and get the rest of the trophies. I tried. I absolutely tried, but every time I went and did something different, I went, this isn't what happened. This isn't right. I was so hooked on what they gave me the first time, what I chose for myself the first time, that it felt disingenuous to even try. So-
I, I feel you, man. Like I guess I wasn't in the same trophy hunting mindset as you, so I didn't feel that compulsive need to go back and explore it. But I do. That's a tough one to overwrite. Like anytime you have that initial experience with a game that's so emotionally invested, I can see where you have that trouble. And to be honest, it surprised me a little bit that this didn't pop up in my mind as I was planning out my games because I remember it being very, very powerful for me as well. But it maybe didn't shift my game playing paradigm as much as some of my other titles did. It was just it was a standout narrative that affected me really deeply. But perhaps because I only played it once, it lives in my memory as a great movie more so than an awesome like interactive adventure.
Oh, I can definitely see that side of it too. Because it got to a certain point, even with the crazy finger jumping jacks and acrobatics you had to do to get things to go properly with the
Right, right.
crazy combinations. I was still completely it. I don't know what it was for me. I know it took quite a few people out of those moments, but I was like it put me in that struggle, trying to contort myself to make the controller do what I wanted it to do in order for um, Evan.
Ethan,
Yeah,
the father.
Ethan. Thank
Yeah.
you. In order for Ethan to do what he wanted or what he needed to do. Yeah. And it
What
might have just been a relative thing for me because, just because of the story I got and the impact that it had on my outlook with games at the point, just because it took away it was a very relative thing because I was still trophy whoring like crazy at that point afterward, but I could not get myself to finish that game's trophy list just because I felt in doing so I was going to deteriorate the experience I had.
Well, I mean, it speaks volumes about the power of the game that you felt that compulsion to not affect the experience. In a similar vein, I haven't replayed The Walking Dead either season because I don't want to taint the the integrity of that story.
Right.
Well, you've done nothing but surprise me with your list, so I'm curious what you saved for last because you've revealed so many games that I don't think my top 10 is really altered in any way, but certainly there's a whole lot more honorable mentions that I could have gone with, and even some that I need to play. So, what rounds out your top 10?
And this isn't the top of my list, obviously, because I've already put that one up there.
Yes,
But
we know, Tim. We know you're a Metal Gear fan. We got it.
fine, Tim. God. The last one in this top 10 is The Walking Dead. Now that you
Hey,
mention
how
it.
about that?
Now that you mention it.
Yes.
And it put the
Interesting.
Walking Dead industry for me on the map. At this point, I hadn't read the comics, and I could not stand the TV show.
Fair enough. Fair enough. What point was the
Uh,
show? I think the show was what, like mid season two when Telltale's game came out. I mean, it was
yep.
pretty early going still, right?
Oh, yeah. Way too early going, and it was those first 6 episodes that were basically just like thrown together for AMC's money to just see if it worked, and then the whatever the animation things showed up. Not animations. I'm just thinking about Metal Gear Solid right now. I can't think of nouns. Uh, the the costume work they did for The Walking Dead really took the second season, and after the first season being such a nonchalant kind of fluff experience for me, having it kind of deject into the second season being just as a showpiece for zombie makeup was kind of just another step away from the franchise. But and again, I at that point I really didn't give it a good chance, and even to my own credit, I gave it plenty of chance after that. I watched up until the end of season 5, and I still wasn't crazy
Wow, that's a little farther than
about.
I made it.
I was. Thank you. I'm really glad I'm not the only non-crazy person. No, I don't want to say that, but I just couldn't. I couldn't. But The Walking Dead became in the game. The Walking Dead with Lee's story with Clementine just became something completely different from what I had experienced before. And sure, like, you look at a universe like The Walking Dead, and you think this kind of thing could happen to anybody. So,
Mm.
the fact that it happened here and you have it happen up north in the TV show, is kind of a thing. They have those little bit of ties, and I can't remember the one character's name, but he comes back and forth between.
I think Glenn, right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. um, yeah, but it really put it on the map for me.
To me, it put Telltale on the map. I mean, honestly, like
Well,
I had actually played Back to the Future, the episodic series. That was my
uh,
first Telltale game, and I enjoyed it. It was, well, it was a game. It was,
it was a game, and it was a testament that they knew how to make games.
right, right. Um, but yeah, the that's a good one. You lived up to the promise of continuing to surprise me because I felt a lot of emotional resonance with the Walking Dead series as well in a way that actually Telltale has kind of failed to rekindle for me personally with the series that followed. There's something
Yep.
very human and incredibly affecting about the relationship that develops between Lee and Clementine and the moment to moment choices of that. I think it's the fact that it's such a constant. Like Lee and Clem is the thread throughout that entire game. It's not unlike The Last of Us in that respect, except here you get to decide what kind of human being Lee is, and
Hmm.
then your actions and your behavior is reflected in the way Clementine treats you. I think that's what
Yep.
made it so emotionally powerful for me.
Yeah, certainly. And Telltale really proved its merit by making the game narratively heavy,
Hmm.
because I wouldn't say by any stretch of anything that The Walking Dead was a technological marvel when compared to Back to the Future.
Hmm.
Not even close. If anything, they have the similar execution. But the fact that people were willing to withstand some of the little issues of the general mechanic of the game was that the story was that potent.
Yes,
You
totally.
don't have that sort of integrity with Back to the Future. That's just fan service.
Yeah,
But Walking Dead takes a namesake from something, yanks it out, and makes it its own, as opposed to just copy and pasting with a little bit of little things in it.
totally agreed. Totally agreed. Great choice. Great choice. Oh, that's a list, man. That is a look back on a whole generation of quality. I guess that does leave one on my top 10 though that I didn't get to. That's Deus Ex: Human Revolution. I mentioned it, but
Hmm.
to advocate it for just a moment, I haven't I haven't played slash I haven't finished the original Deus Ex. It's a hard game to go back to. It really
Hmm.
doesn't hold up very well
Yep.
today. But when we talk about cohesive vision, I mean, you mentioned that being a highlight of The Last of Us for you. Prince of Persia was the same way. I mean, really, all the games that we're talking about here have a vision and they adhere to it. With Deus Ex, it's a visible future vision. I don't want to call it a near future, but it's a visible future vision, and it's an interpretation that really throws you in the heat of this science fiction theory, and as in this is what the world could look like if it evolves in this way, and then makes that your playground as the player. Like you get to choose which missions you embark on and which you don't. You really and even going into it, even knowing that the game was all about choice, I was still skeptical that that was truly going to be the case. I mean, in most games, choice means which of these three scripted outcomes do you want to follow. Something like Dishonored is a good example. You've got like
Hmm.
at most three ways you could effectively approach any mission. It's not like you have this boundless sort of playground. But with Deus Ex, more so than those other titles, it really felt like you did. I vividly remember doing weird shit like stacking boxes to get over a fence and like just things that, clearly some paths through that game felt intentional. Like this is set up to be one way for you. There's this alternative. There's this one. But then there were definitely times where I felt like my strategy for getting through something was creative and not planned for by the developers, and that's what made their version of choice powerful and actually mean something. Like this was actually choice where I could be creative and find really weird janky ways around solutions, but because it's what I wanted to do. Like that's how I want to approach this and see if it works, and more often than not I was able to make it work, whatever that idea happened to be.
Right, certainly, and that's what it was. That was a big thing for me too, and just in the simple fact that not only did it affect the narrative, but it also affected how you approach the game. Not even just in those moments, but later on too. So it's just a
As an
before I
aesthet-
digress, before I digress on that
Sure.
game, that's one of the games that suffered from my trophy whoreness.
Oh, that's unfortunate because that's a tough
And
one with its missed opportunities and missables.
yep, and I got to a certain point on the hardest difficulty and realized I had missed like 4 or 5 things, and
Oh
I looked at and
man.
I went, okay, okay, I'm still having a lot of fun with this game, even though it's breaking my balls and destroying me and really super hard, and it's still my jam right now. I still want to do it. And I played for a good, 10, 15 hours, and then I kept looking back and I kept looking back, and I wish at that point I had stopped myself from this whole trophy harness. It was actually only until the PS4 when I finally cut myself off and stopped, and I have a personal sense of animosity for games like Deus Ex that I've missed
Hmm.
because of that narrow vision. Because I've played a lot of shitty games. A lot. But those are all on my namesake now, and I don't have games like Deus Ex on the top of my mantle. But
It's okay, man. It's forgivable.
you say that, but
Never. I mean, it's a game that I love deeply. I've actually played through it 4 times, I think, over the years. Like, tends to be about a year apart each time. I just get the itch to go back to it, and I honestly enjoy each playthrough as much as the last. It really spoke to me. But I can see how. Yeah, the trophy thing's been frustrating because I've contemplated going back and actually getting that platinum, like because I tend to gravitate toward the games that I really truly love when I think about
yeah.
platinum hunting.
And that should be how it is, honestly.
Yeah,
I've only learned that recently.
it's just I don't know. It's a little too much work. It's one of those where like I love playing the game and really embracing that freedom of choice. And if I play to a prescribed method of like go here, do this to get the trophies, that's just going to remove that what I think makes the game special for me. I mean, I can't do anything to interrupt that. But
Hey, that's on par with my Heavy Rain. Like pretty
yeah,
much word for word.
completely. Yeah, totally it is. And then finally, what seals the deal for me on Deus Ex is not just that vision of what the world could look like in a world of augmentations and what sort of class gaps that creates. How do corporations evolve to profit off of this new science, this new technology? It actually gets down to the visual level. I think the art direction and mechanical design of Deus Ex's world is very compelling, if only because it's so believable. I mean, the color schemes, I mean, it's a very gold game. I mean, gold and black is its language, to the point of like no world, no city would ever conceivably look this tinted. But I guess I can look past the realism of it and appreciate it for being for the tone it imbues, in this case being something of a technological renaissance. I think the periods of history that are worth talking about today have dominant colors and dominant designs that you associate with that time period. And for me, Deus Ex really effectively establishes a sort of a seedy wealth. Like the gold is representative of the wealth that people have acquired and the sophistication that the rich can afford now. And then there's the black to seat you in the reality of, well, with that explosive growth comes things that we forget, or people that we forget about, and cities that we forget about. which really just gets the brain churning. I think that's the dominant theme for the titles that made it in here with a narrative focus, like BioShock Infinite and like Deus Ex, is that they get me thinking in ways that other forms of media haven't, or rarely do, I should say.
Oh, certainly. And going back to Deus Ex, I think the putting the cherry on top of that hubris sort of cake is that I have a huge affinity for cake right now, so it's been my metaphor throughout this whole podcast. But they put the cherry on this cake, this hubris cake, is the fact that all of these almost hyperbolic sort of pieces of imagery or story arcs or narrative tropes, they're all reminiscent of things that are happening still, and that's what makes, and being able to execute that well is what makes science fiction so relevant all the time. It's so special because even though it feels like it's way in the future, you have all these gadgets, all these crazy things, it's still a place where it could go, and it's still a very corrupt place.
Mm-hmm.
Like things, the human side of everything doesn't change. Like you just have different ways of doing it.
Yeah, it just bleeds so well into a reflection of our present day because literally, by its very definition, science fiction takes place in a future that results from the present. So what's so compelling about the stories, and really it comes back to what makes Deus Ex so special for me, is that it's a perfect chance to examine some of the problems inherent to today's society and show a theoretical implication of that.
Oh yeah.
On top of it being just a great like open-ended choice-based RPG with really cool weapons and guns. I mean that can't be understated. I mean it's a blast to play with really good controls and mechanics. So it
Right.
really earns its spot.
I'm just thankful for PlayStation Plus. PlayStation be praised to give me Deus Ex for free, and it's sitting on my PlayStation 3 downstairs.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I totally forgot that popped up at some point.
So it'll
Well, that's
never
awesome.
go away. I still have it, and I can still get to it.
I'm glad, man. I'm glad. Wow, we've run the gamut. We have PS3 is in the books now, Tim. I think there's not much more to say about it except that I gotta thank you for putting some more titles into my own personal limelight. Like I want to go back and play Catherine, but I want to play Prince of Persia now too. After hearing you talk about it, so it's
You
just
got it, man. It's so cheap too. It's a fiscal irresponsibility not to.
nice, nice. I don't think I've ever heard a game, I don't ever, a purchase that I haven't made described as a fiscal irresponsibility. That's something new. But I feel you, man. I feel you. It's now near the top of my list. Thank you, man. Thank you for this conversation. I think we've really come to grips with everything that PS3 has to offer.
Yeah, this has been wonderful, and yeah, you've been the final peg in my noggin. I can't think of a good thing to think about it now, but you've been that final knock on the door for me to go and really experience Journey. But I'm not like you said, I'm not doing it today. I'm probably not going to do it this week, just because I've been crazy about Final
No,
Fantasy
that's
14.
fine, man.
But
The PS4 definitive version is waiting for you whenever you're ready for it.
and I want it. I want something like that now, so I can kind of get into that mindset for the possibly next great sort of game, The Last Guardian.
Oh, it wouldn't be a bad idea to play Journey before that. It's almost required reading. All right, you've
Yeah.
got your assignment.
And you yours.
Thank you, sir. Well, thanks for listening to us, guys. Thanks for following along with our conversation as we espoused on the best games that PS3 had to offer. This is a great chance for you to chime in, though. Whether you're watching this on YouTube, listening on PSU.com, through our SoundCloud channel, wherever you may be, find a way to get in touch with us. Let us know what your favorite PS3 games were of all time. What stands out? What was your best experience, your favorite memory, or really just the objective best? Give us whatever you've got. There's plenty of places you can do that. We're all on Twitter. We're all doing the PSU thing day in, day out, so chime in the comments. We'd really love it if you could leave a review on iTunes. Let us know what you think of the show in general, because that always helps us have better PlayStation conversations for you. So thanks for listening, guys. We really appreciate it. Take care.